The blood on Zadie Crawford's hands had dried to a dark rust color by the time she stumbled into San Andreas, California, her father's wagon creaking behind the exhausted mule. She had driven 6 days straight from their claim in the Sierra Nevada foothills, stopping only when the animal refused to go further, and now as the late afternoon sun of August 1873 beat down on the dusty main street, she knew she had maybe an hour before her father took his last breath. The town physician, a balding man with spectacles that caught the light, took one look at the gash across her father's chest and the fever burning in his eyes, then shook his head with the kind of finality that made Zadie's knees buckle. "I can make him comfortable," Dr. Morrison said, his voice not unkind. "But that infection has spread too far. I am sorry, Miss Crawford." She sat beside her father's cot in the room above the general store, holding his calloused hand as the morphine took him somewhere beyond pain. Malcolm Crawford had been a prospector, a dreamer, a man who chased gold through every mountain range west of the Mississippi. The claim he had filed 3 months ago was supposed to be different, supposed to be the one that finally paid off. Instead, a rotted mine support had collapsed, and the timber had caught him across the ribs like the hand of an angry god. "The cabin," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Zadie girl, promise me, finish the cabin." She leaned closer, smoothing the gray hair back from his fevered forehead. "Papa, I don't know how. I don't know the first thing about building." "You are stronger than you know." His grip tightened with surprising force. "That land, it is good land. Water runs year-round. Timber stands thick. Do not let them take it from you. Do not sell it for pennies like your mother would have done." Zadie's mother had died when she was 12, leaving her to follow her father through mining camps and frontier towns, learning to cook over open fires and mend clothes by candlelight. She could shoot a rifle well enough to bring down a deer, could read and write better than most men she knew, but carpentry, that was a different matter entirely. "Promise me," Malcolm insisted, and because he was dying and because she loved him despite his faults, Zadie promised. He passed just after midnight, slipping away between one rattling breath and the absence of the next. She sat in the darkness for a long time, still holding his hand, feeling the warmth slowly leave his body. When morning came, she arranged for a simple burial in the town cemetery and stood alone as they lowered him into the California earth, the mountains he had loved rising purple and imposing in the distance. The land office clerk, a nervous young man with ink stains on his fingers, confirmed that the claim was legally hers now, inherited as Malcolm Crawford's only living heir. "It is up near Grizzly Creek," he said, spreading a survey map across his desk. "Rough country. You have family who can help you work it?" "No," Zadie said simply. She had $87 to her name, a mule, a wagon full of her father's tools, and a half-finished cabin in the wilderness. "But I made a promise." The clerk's expression suggested he thought she was insane, but he processed the paperwork without comment. By noon, Zadie was driving the wagon north out of San Andreas, following the rutted track that climbed into the foothills where ponderosa pine and black oak gradually replaced the grasslands. The cabin stood in a clearing beside Grizzly Creek, exactly as her father had described it. The foundation was solid, built from river stones mortared together with surprising skill. 3 walls stood complete, the logs fitted together with careful notches. But the 4th wall rose only 4 feet high, and there was no roof, just open sky above the skeleton of what might have become a home. Zadie climbed down from the wagon and walked slowly around the structure, trailing her fingers along the rough bark of the logs. She could see where her father had worked, could see the marks left by his hands and tools. Some logs showed the clean cuts of a saw, while others bore the distinctive marks of a drill and auger, each timber carefully shaped and fitted. He had built this with his own hands, each piece a testament to his dream of finally settling down. She pressed her palm against one of the logs, feeling the texture of the wood, the small indentations where the drill had bitten into the grain. Her throat tightened with grief so fresh it felt like a wound reopening. "You planning to finish that, or just admiring the view?" Zadie spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle she kept in the wagon. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, and her first impression was of sheer size. He had to be 6'4" at least, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway and arms corded with muscle visible even through his worn cotton shirt. Dark hair fell past his collar, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. He carried an axe over one shoulder with the casual ease of someone who spent his days working with tools that could kill a man. "Who are you?" Zadie demanded, not lowering her hand from the rifle. "Owen Lewis." He shifted the axe to his other shoulder, his movements unhurried. "I have a cabin about 2 miles upstream. Saw smoke from your fire yesterday. Figured I would check if Malcolm finally came back up to finish his building." The use of her father's first name caught her off guard. "You knew him?" "Met him a few times. Traded some venison for coffee back in June." Owen's gaze moved from her to the cabin and back again. "I am guessing he will not be coming back. He died 3 days ago." The words came out flat, matter of fact. Zadie had learned early not to indulge in tears, not in front of strangers. Infection from a mining accident. Owen was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had softened slightly. "I am sorry. He seemed like a decent man, he was." Zadie straightened her shoulders, forcing steel into her spine. "And I intend to finish what he started." Owen's eyes traveled over her deliberately, not with the leering assessment she had endured from other men, but with frank skepticism. She was 21 years old, tall for a woman at 5'7", with dark blonde hair she kept braided down her back and a build made lean by years of frontier living. She wore men's trousers because skirts were impractical for the kind of life she led, and her hands bore calluses from reins and rifle alike. "You ever built anything before?" Owen asked. "No," Zadie admitted, "but I can learn. I am not asking for your help or your opinion, Mr. Lewis. I was just telling you what I intend to do." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his weathered face. "Fair enough. You need anything, you know where to find me. 2 miles upstream, like I said." He turned and walked back into the trees with the long, easy stride of a man completely at home in the wilderness. Zadie watched until he disappeared from view, then released a breath she had not realized she was holding. The next week proved harder than anything Zadie had imagined. She spent the first 2 days just sorting through her father's tools, trying to understand what each one did and how it might be used. The saw made sense, and the hammer, but there were chisels and augers and strange implements whose purposes she could only guess at. She found her father's notes tucked into a leather satchel, sketches and measurements written in his cramped handwriting, and she studied them by firelight each night until her eyes burned. The logs needed for the 4th wall were already cut and stacked near the tree line, each one marked with chalk to indicate its position. Her father had planned everything out carefully. The problem was getting the logs into place. The smallest weighed at least 200 pounds, and no amount of determination could compensate for simple physics. Zadie tried rigging a pulley system using rope and a sturdy oak branch, but the rope snapped and the log crashed down, missing her foot by inches. She tried rolling the logs, but could not control their momentum on the slope. She tried dragging them with the mule, but the animal balked and refused to cooperate after the first attempt. By the 5th day, she had managed to wrestle exactly one log into position, and it sat crooked in its notch, mocking her efforts. Her hands were blistered despite the gloves she wore, her back ached from sleeping on the ground, and she was running low on the supplies she had brought from San Andreas. She was sitting on that crooked log, staring at her bleeding palms and trying not to cry from sheer frustration when Owen Lewis emerged from the trees again. "Figured you might need a hand by now," he said without preamble. Pride made her want to refuse, but practicality won out. "Yes," Zadie said quietly, "I do." Owen set down the pack he carried and walked over to examine the wall. He ran his hands along the logs her father had already placed, checking the notches and the fit. "Malcolm did good work," he said. "This will stand for 50 years if it is finished right." "Can you show me how?" Zadie asked. "I do not expect you to do it for me, but if you could teach me the basics, I would be grateful." Owen looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable. Then he nodded. "We will start tomorrow, first light. You have food?" "Some. I will bring extra." He glanced at the crooked log she sat on, "and we will fix that." True to his word, Owen appeared the next morning as the sun was just breaking over the mountains, carrying a pack loaded with biscuits, dried meat, and fresh eggs wrapped in cloth. They ate breakfast by the fire, and then he began to teach. Zadie learned that building a cabin was as much about patience as strength. Owen showed her how to use a draw knife to strip bark, how to score the wood with a chisel before drilling, how to test the fit of each notch before committing to the cut. His hands, she noticed, were enormous, scarred and calloused from years of hard labor, but they moved with surprising precision when working the wood. "Why do you live up here alone?" Zadie asked one afternoon as they worked together to lift a log into place. Owen took most of the weight, but he positioned her so that her effort actually contributed to the lift rather than just making her feel useful. "Same reason as anybody, I suppose." Owen grunted as the log settled into its notch. "I like the quiet. You were not always a mountain man." "No." He picked up the drill to bore holes for the wooden pegs that would secure the log. "I was a soldier during the war. Afterward, I tried going back to Ohio where I grew up, but it did not take. Too many people, too much noise. Came west at 69 and kept going until I found a place that felt right." Zadie did the math in her head. "How old are you?" 32. Owen glanced at her. "Too old to be teaching fool women how to build cabins, some might say." "I am not a fool," Zadie said sharply. "Did not say you were. I said some might to say. I think you are stubborn and inexperienced, but not a fool." He handed her the drill. "Your turn. Remember, steady pressure. Let the bit do the work." She took the tool and positioned it against the wood, feeling the weight of it in her blistered hands. Owen stood close behind her, not touching but near enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body in the cool mountain air. "Steady," he murmured. "That is it." The drill bit into the wood slowly, shavings curling away from the hole. Zadie's arms shook with the effort of keeping the pressure even, but she refused to quit. When she finally broke through the other side, Owen made a sound of approval that warmed her more than it should have. They worked together through the rest of August and into September. The fourth wall rose log by log, each piece fitted with increasing precision as Zadie's skills improved. Owen came every day, arriving at dawn and staying until the light failed, teaching her not just how to build but how to see the wood, how to understand its grain and its properties. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. Zadie told him about growing up in mining camps, about her mother who had died of pneumonia in a Montana winter, about following her father from one failed claim to another, always believing the next one would be different. Owen shared less, but gradually she learned that he had fought at Shiloh and Vicksburg, that he had lost 2 brothers in the war, that he had spent 4 years trying to forget what he had seen before, finally finding peace in these mountains. "Do you ever get lonely?" Zadie asked one night as the September stars wheeled overhead. Owen was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "Sometimes," he finally said, "but lonely is better than what I felt around people after the war, like I did not fit in my own skin anymore. And now I fit again." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. "These mountains, they do not care what you have done or what you have seen. They just are. There is something restful in that." Zadie understood more than he probably realized. She had spent her whole life not quite fitting either, too educated for the rough frontier towns, too poor and unconventional for polite society, too independent to accept the limitations other people wanted to place on her. The fourth wall was completed in the 3rd week of September. Zadie stood back and looked at it with a sense of accomplishment that went bone deep. She had built this, or at least finished it, with her own hands. She could see her work in the wall, could see the marks where she had drilled and chiseled and shaped the wood. Her efforts were rougher than her father's, less practiced, but they were hers. "Now comes the hard part," Owen said, and Zadie turned to stare at him. The walls were the easy part, easier than the roof anyway. But he was almost smiling, and Zadie felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with exhaustion. They began work on the roof frame the next day. This required cutting and shaping beams, constructing the skeleton that would support the planks and eventual shingles. Owen built a simple saw horse, and he taught Zadie how to read the grain of the wood to determine where it would split cleanly and where it might crack unexpectedly. October arrived with cooler nights and the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides. Zadie had been living out of her wagon for nearly 3 months now, and while she had grown accustomed to the discomfort, she found herself eager to have an actual roof over her head before winter arrived in earnest. Owen had become a constant presence in her life, as reliable as the sunrise. She woke each morning knowing he would appear, ready to work. They had developed an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's movements, communicating as much through gesture as words. Sometimes Zadie would look up from her work to find Owen watching her, and there would be something in his expression that made her heart beat faster, but he never acted on it, never overstepped the unspoken boundaries between them. One afternoon in mid-October, they were working to lift a particularly heavy beam into place for the roof when Zadie's foot slipped on a patch of moss-slick stone. She fell backward, and Owen dropped his end of the beam to catch her, his strong arms closing around her waist and pulling her against his chest before she could hit the ground. For a moment they stood frozen, Zadie pressed against the solid wall of muscle that was Owen's torso, his arms still holding her secure. She could feel his heart beating, rapid and strong, could smell the scent of pine sap and wood smoke that clung to his clothes. "You all right?" His voice was rough, deeper than usual. "Yes." Zadie tilted her head back to look up at him. His face was so close she could see the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair. At the temples could see the scar that cut through his left eyebrow. "Thank you." Owen's gray eyes searched her face, and she saw something fierce and hungry flash through them before he carefully, deliberately released her and stepped back. "Watch your footing," he said, his tone once again neutral. "Ground is getting slick with the fall weather." They finished installing the beam in silence, but Tumchis had shifted between them, a recognition of the tension that had been building for weeks now. Zadie found herself hyper-aware of Owen's presence, of his hands when he reached past her to adjust a plank, of the flex of muscle in his arms when he lifted heavy loads, of the way his shirt pulled tight across his broad shoulders when he stretched. That night, lying in her bedroll under the wagon, Zadie admitted to herself what she had been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Owen Lewis. It was impractical and probably foolish, given that she barely knew him despite the hours they had spent working together. But her heart did not seem to care about practicality. It wanted what it wanted, and it wanted the quiet mountain man who had appeared when she needed help and stayed because he apparently wanted to. The roof was completed in early November, just as the first snow began to fall. They had worked longer hours those last few days, racing against the weather, and when Owen nailed the final shingle into place, Zadie felt such overwhelming relief she actually laughed. "It is done," she said, standing in what was now the interior of her cabin, looking up at the solid roof overhead. "We actually finished it." "You finished it," Owen corrected. "I just showed you how." Zadie turned to face him. Snow was beginning to dust his hair and shoulders, and in the fading light, he looked almost otherworldly, some spirit of the mountains made flesh. "I could not have done this without you, you know that." "Maybe not." Owen stepped closer, and suddenly the interior of the cabin felt very small. "But you would have tried. You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met, Zadie Crawford." "Is that a compliment?" "It is an observation." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, rough and warm. "And maybe a compliment." Zadie's breath caught. "Owen, I should go," he said abruptly, dropping his hand. "Storm is coming in. I need to get back before it hits hard." He was gone before she could find words to stop him, striding out into the falling snow and disappearing into the trees. Zadie stood in her completed cabin, surrounded by the walls she had helped build, tracing her fingers over the drill marks and chisel cuts that told the story of her father's work and her own, and wondered if she had just imagined the longing in Owen Lewis's eyes. The storm Owen had predicted rolled in with a vengeance that night, bringing heavy snow and winds that howled through the pines. Zadie spent her first night inside the cabin, grateful for the solid walls and roof, but unable to sleep for wondering if Owen had made it back to his own place safely. When morning came, the world had transformed into a landscape of white. Snow lay thick on the ground and hung heavy in the branches, beautiful and dangerous. Zadie kept the fire burning in the stone hearth her father had built, rationing her wood and trying not to worry when Owen did not appear. He did not come the next day either, or the day after that. By the fourth day, Zadie was seriously considering trying to find his cabin herself, storm or no storm, but she had only a vague sense of direction 2 miles upstream, and the snow had obliterated any trail he might have left on. previous visits. On the fifth day, she woke to the sound of someone chopping wood outside her cabin. She grabbed her rifle and cracked open the door to find Owen splitting logs from her dwindling woodpile into smaller, more manageable pieces. Grief flooded through her so intense it was almost painful. "You are all right." Owen looked up, his breath steaming in the cold air. "Why would I not be? You have been gone for 5 days. I thought maybe something happened." He set down the axe and walked toward her, snow crunching under his boots. "The storm was bad. I did not think it was safe to make the trip. But I figured you would be running low on split wood by now." "I was." Zadie stepped aside to let him enter the cabin. It was not much yet, just 4 walls, a roof and a hearth, with her bedroll in one corner and her meager possessions stacked along the walls, but it was hers. "Come inside. Warm yourself." Owen stamped the snow from his boots and ducked through the doorway, having to bend slightly to clear the frame. He looked around the interior with an assessing eye, then nodded. "This is good. Solid work. Thanks to you not giving up." Owen moved to the hearth, holding his hands toward the flames. Most people would have sold the claim and gone back to town. "I made a promise to my father." Zadie put the rifle aside and poured coffee from the pot she kept warming by the fire. "Besides, I like it here. It is quiet. Thought you said you never knew a life that was not moving from one place to another." "I did not. Maybe that is why this feels so good. Having a place that is mine, that I do not have to leave when the claim runs out or the season changes." She handed him a tin cup of coffee. "Or maybe I am just tired of running." Owen's fingers brushed hers as he took the cup, and the contact sent warmth racing up her arm. Nothing wrong with wanting to put down roots. They drank their coffee in companionable silence, and then Owen went back outside to finish splitting the wood. Zadie joined him, stacking the split logs under the overhang of the cabin's roof where they would stay relatively dry. They worked together as they had for months now, moving in easy synchronization, and Zadie felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. When the wood was all split and stacked, Owen did not immediately leave. Instead, he walked the perimeter of the cabin, checking the chinking between the logs, testing the shutters on the windows, examining the roof from every angle. "What are you looking for?" Zadie finally asked. "Making sure everything will hold through winter. This was your father's first season up here. The cabin has not been tested yet." Owen paused near the corner where Zadie had done most of the work on the 4th wall. He ran his hand over the logs, tracing the marks her inexperienced hands had left in the wood. "You can see the difference between his work and yours." Zadie felt a flash of defensiveness. "I know mine is not as good." "Did not say that." Owen glanced at her. "Just said it was different. His marks are confident, practiced. Yours are more hesitant, but they get surer as the wall goes up. You can see you learning, right here in the wood." He was right. Zadie stepped closer, looking at the progression of drill marks and chisel cuts that marked her labor. The lower logs showed her uncertainty. The holes drilled at slightly wrong angles, the cuts not quite deep enough. But as the wall rose, the work improved, became more certain. It was a record of her transformation, preserved in wood and time. "I traced my father's marks the first night after he died," Zadie said quietly. "Before I even came up here, I ran my hands over the logs he had already placed and tried to understand what he had done, how he had shaped each piece. It felt like touching the last pieces of him, you know. His hands had been here, had worked this wood, had left these marks behind." Owen was very still beside her. "And now your marks are here too." "Yes." Zadie pressed her palm against one of the logs she had drilled, feeling the texture of it. "I like knowing that. Even after I am gone, these marks will remain. Proof that I was here, that I did this. You are not planning on going anywhere, are you?" Something in Owen's voice made her turn to look at him. "No," she said. "This is my home now. I am staying." "Good." Owen reached out and covered her hand with his own, pressing it more firmly against the log. His hand dwarfed hers, rough and warm and strong. "I am glad you are staying, Zadie." Her name in his mouth sounded like something precious. "Owen, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low and intense, "and I need you to let me say it all before you respond, all right?" Zadie nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I came up to these mountains 4 years ago because I could not stand being around people anymore. I built my cabin, lived off the land, spent my days working and my nights trying not to remember things I would rather forget. I told myself I was content, that I did not need anything more than what I had. And then you showed up, all stubborn determination and bleeding hands, refusing to give up on a promise you made to your dying father. Owen's grip tightened on her hand. These past months, working with you, teaching you, watching, you refused to quit no matter how hard it got, Zadie. You made me remember what it feels like to want something more than just solitude. What do you want? Zadie whispered. You. The word was simple, direct, devastating. I want you. I want to wake up and know you are nearby. I want to help you build furniture for this cabin and plant a garden come spring and figure out how to make a life up here. I want... He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. I am not good with words. I am better with my hands, with doing rather than saying. But I needed you to know. Before winter really sets in and we might not see each other for weeks, I needed you to know how I feel. Zadie stared up at him, at this massive, strong, gentle man who had appeared exactly when she needed him and stayed because he wanted to. I traced your work too, she said. The logs you helped me place. I can tell which ones you guided and which ones I did more of. I can see your marks mixed with mine, and I love that. I love seeing the evidence of us working together. Owen's eyes darkened. Zadie, I am not finished. She turned her hand under his, lacing their fingers together. I came up here planning to be alone, to honor my father's dream and make a home for myself out of grief and stubbornness. I did not plan on you. But I am so glad you happened anyway, Owen Lewis. I am so glad you did not stay away, that you kept coming back, that you taught me and worked beside me and made me feel less alone. She took a breath, feeling like she was about to step off a cliff. I love you. The words hung in the cold air between them. Owen stared at her like she had just performed a miracle, his expression cycling through shock and wonder and something that looked almost like pain. You do not have to say it back, Zadie said quickly. I know it is fast, we have only known each other a few months, but Owen kissed her, cutting off her words with the press of his mouth against hers. It was not a gentle kiss, it was desperate and claiming, one hand coming up to cup the back of her head while the other wrapped around her waist and pulled her hard against his body. Zadie made a surprised sound and then opened to him, rising on her toes to meet his intensity with her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. I love you too, he said roughly. God help me. I love you too, Zadie Crawford. They spent the rest of the day together, not working for once, just being. Owen brought in more firewood while Zadie prepared a meal from their combined supplies. They ate sitting close together on the floor near the hearth, and Owen told her about his cabin upstream, about the life he had built there. It is bigger than this, he said. 2 rooms with a sleeping loft. I have furniture, a proper bed frame, books even, though not many. I tried to make it comfortable because I figured I would be spending a lot of years there alone. Will you show me sometime? Zadie asked, soon as the weather clears enough for safe travel. Owen hesitated. Or you could come stay there. Through the worst of winter, I mean. It would be warmer than here, with more supplies stored up. Zadie understood what he was really asking. Would I have my own room? The loft. Owen's jaw tightened. I would not presume, Zadie. You would have privacy, your own space. I do not like the thought of you up here alone through the hard months. If something happened, if you got hurt or sick, no one would know. He was right, and Zadie knew it. But there was another consideration, one that made her cheeks heat despite the cold. What if I do not want my own room? Owen went very still. What are you saying? I am saying that I am 21 years old enough to make my own choices. I am saying that I love you and you love me, and we are both adults living alone in the wilderness where nobody cares about propriety or convention. Zadie met his eyes steadily. I am saying that if I come stay at your cabin, I would want to share your bed. If you want that too. Want it? Owen's voice was strained. Zadie, I have wanted that since the first time I touched you, but I will not rush you. We can wait, do things properly. Come spring, we could go down to San Andreas, find a preacher, or we could marry ourselves, Zadie interrupted. People do that out here, do they not? Make their own promises before God in the wilderness without needing anyone else's permission. Owen looked at her for a long moment, something fierce and tender in his expression. Are you asking me to marry you, Zadie Crawford? I suppose I am. She felt breathless, reckless. more alive than she had ever felt, unless you have objections. Instead of answering with words, Owen stood and pulled her to her feet, then dropped to one knee on the rough plank floor of the cabin. He took both her hands in his, looking up at her with an expression that made her throat tight. Zadie Crawford, I do not have a ring to give you or fancy words to say, but I promise you this, I will love you and protect you and stand beside you for as long as I draw breath. I will help you work this land and build this life you want. I will never raise my hand to you in anger, never betray your trust, never give you cause to doubt my devotion. If you will have me, I will be your husband in every way that matters, from this day forward. Tears were streaming down Zadie's face now, hot against her cold cheeks. I will have you, she said, Owen Lewis. I will love you and stand beside you and build this life with you. I promise to be honest and faithful and true. I promise to share your burdens and your joys. I promise to be your wife in every way that matters from this day forward. Owen rose and kissed her again, softer this time, sealing the promises they had made. When he pulled back, he was smiling, an expression Zadie had rarely seen on his usually serious face. We are married, he said, sounding slightly awed by the idea. We are married, Zadie agreed. Now take me home, husband. They packed what she would need from the cabin: clothes, personal items, her father's papers and tools. Owen fashioned a sled from planks and rope, loading her possessions onto it to drag through the snow. Before they left, Zadie walked one more circuit of the cabin's interior, trailing her hands along the walls. We will come back in spring, Owen said from the doorway. This can be our summer cabin, or we could fix it up to use as a storage building. Either way, it will not go to waste. Good. Zadie pressed her palm one last time against the marks her father had left in the wood, then against the marks she had made herself. I am not ready to leave it forever, but I am ready to go with you. The trip to Owen's cabin took over an hour, following Grizzly Creek upstream through heavy snow. But Owen knew the way intimately, and he broke trail with the same steady strength he brought to everything he did. Zadie followed in his footsteps, watching the play of muscle across his broad back, still half amazed that this man was now her husband. Owen's cabin was indeed bigger than hers, a solid structure nestled against the mountainside, with smoke rising from its stone chimney. He had built a small barn as well, where a sturdy bay horse nickered at their approach. You have a horse, Zadie said, surprised. Had to pack in supplies somehow. Owen led her to the cabin and pushed open the door. Welcome home, wife. The interior was warm and surprisingly comfortable. A large bed frame dominated one corner, piled with furs and wool blankets. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies, tools, and a small collection of books. A table and 2 chairs sat near the hearth, and a ladder led up to the sleeping loft Owen had mentioned. It is wonderful, Zadie said honestly. You have made a real home here. We have made a real home here, Owen corrected. He set down the pack he had been carrying and turned to her. Everything I have is yours now, Zadie. This cabin, my supplies, my horse, all of it. Zadie stepped closer, reaching up to cup his bearded face in her hands. And everything I have is yours. Which is not much, but you are all I need. Owen bent to kiss her, and this time when he pulled her against him, there was no reason to hold back, no propriety to observe. They were married, husband and wife, and the world beyond these walls had no claim on them. What followed was tender and overwhelming, Owen's careful hands learning her body while she learned his. He was patient despite the hunger she could feel in the tension of his muscles, making sure she was ready before taking what she offered. There was some pain, brief and sharp, but Owen kissed it away and then showed her pleasure she had not known existed. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, their bed now with furs pulled over their cooling skin. Zadie traced the scars that marked Owen's chest and arms, evidence of the war he rarely spoke about. Tell me, she said softly. Owen was quiet for a long time, his hand stroking slowly through her unbound hair. What do you want to know? Whatever you want to share. So he told her, haltingly at first and then with increasing openness. He told her about enlisting at 19, full of idealism and certainty about the righteousness of the cause. He told her about Shiloh, about standing in line while cannonballs tore through the ranks, about the screams of wounded men and the smell of blood and gunpowder. He told her about his brothers, both killed at Vicksburg, their bodies never recovered. He told her about the years after, trying to go home to Ohio and finding he no longer fit there, no longer knew how to be around people who had not seen what he had seen. I thought I was broken, Owen said, his voice rough with old pain. Thought maybe I would always be broken. And then I found these mountains, and I could breathe again. Could sleep without nightmares, could wake up without dreading the day ahead. Zadie pressed a kiss to one of the scars on his shoulder. You are not broken. You are just a man who saw terrible things and survived them. Maybe. Owen's arms tightened around her. But you make me feel whole again, Zadie. You make me believe I can be more than just a man hiding from the world. You were never hiding, Zadie said. You were healing. There is a difference. They spent the winter months learning each other, settling into the rhythms of married life. Owen taught Zadie how to snowshoe and how to read the signs of coming storms in the clouds. Zadie taught Owen how to read aloud from his small collection of books, something he admitted he had never done much of before. They cooked together, splitting wood together, talked for hours by the fire about their pasts and their hopes for the future. On the coldest nights, when snow piled high against the cabin walls and wind howled through the pines, they made love with slow intensity, finding warmth and comfort in each other's bodies. Zadie had never imagined marriage could be like this, partnership and passion combined, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. In late January, Zadie realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be certain, and when February passed with no change, she knew. She was carrying Owen's child. She told him one evening after dinner, simply and directly, I am pregnant. Owen froze in the act of banking the fire, his back to her. For a long moment he did not move, and Zadie felt a flutter of anxiety. They had never discussed children, had been too focused on simply surviving and building their life together. Then Owen turned, and the expression on his face stole her breath. Wonder and joy and something almost like fear warred in his eyes. Are you sure? He asked. As sure as I can be. My courses have not come for 2 months, and I have been sick in the mornings. Zadie twisted her hands together. I know we did not plan this, but Owen crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. A baby, he said, his voice muffled against her hair. We are going to have a baby. You are happy? Zadie asked, relaxing into his embrace. Happy does not begin to cover it. Owen pulled back enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. I never thought I would have this, a wife, a child, a family. I thought that part of life was not for men like me. Why not? Because I have killed men, Zadie, more than I can count. Because I have blood on my hands that will never wash clean. His jaw tightened. What if I am not good enough? What if I cannot be the kind of father a child deserves? Zadie covered his hands with hers. You are the best man I know, Owen Lewis. You are kind and patient and strong. You will be a wonderful father. I hope you are right. Owen bent to kiss her, gentle and reverent. Because I already love this child more than I thought possible. Spring came slowly to the high country, snow lingering in the shaded spots well into April. But when the aspens finally budded green and wildflowers began to appear in the meadows, Owen and Zadie made the trip down to San Andreas. They needed supplies for the coming year, and Zadie wanted to see a doctor to confirm the pregnancy and make sure everything was progressing normally. Dr. Morrison examined her and declared her healthy, estimating the baby would arrive in early September. He raised an eyebrow at her wedding ring, a simple band Owen had carved from mountain mahogany, but asked no questions about preachers or licenses. In the frontier, such things were often considered optional. They spent 3 days in town, restocking their supplies and purchasing items they would need for the baby. Zadie bought fabric to sew infant clothes and blankets, while Owen ordered tools and hardware from the general store. It felt strange to be around so many people again after the isolation of winter, and Zadie found herself eager to return to the mountains. On their last day in town, as they were loading the wagon, a well-dressed man approached them. He was perhaps 40, with the soft hands and careful grooming of someone who had never done a day of manual labor. Excuse me, the man said, directing his attention to Owen while ignoring Zadie entirely. I understand you have a claim up near Grizzly Creek. The Crawford claim formerly. My wife's claim, Owen said, his voice flat. What of it? I represent a consortium of investors interested in acquiring mineral rights in that area. We would be willing to make a generous offer for the property." Zadie stepped forward. "The claim is not for sale." The man finally looked at her, his expression dismissive. "Perhaps your husband should make that decision, madam. My husband just told you it is my claim," Zadie said coolly. "Which means I make the decisions about it, and I am telling you it is not for sale. Be reasonable. A woman in your condition has no business trying to work a mining claim. Take our offer and buy yourselves a nice house in town where you can raise your family properly." Owen moved then, placing himself between the man and Zadie with deliberate intent. He did not say anything, just stood there radiating barely controlled menace, his size and obvious strength making the threat clear. The man blanched and took a step back. "I see. Well, if you change your mind, my offer will remain open." He retreated quickly, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste. "Fool," Owen muttered. He turned to Zadie. "You all right?" "I am fine." But she was angry, the familiar frustration of being dismissed because of her gender making her jaw tight. How did he even know about the claim? Land office, probably. These speculators go through the records looking for opportunities. Owen helped her up onto the wagon seat. "Do not let it bother you. The land is yours, and no one can take it from you." They returned to the mountains and spent the spring and summer working on both cabins. Owen wanted to make sure Zadie's father's cabin was weather-tight and functional, arguing that having a second dwelling could be useful, especially once the baby came and they might want more space. They repaired the chinking, built a proper door and shutters, and constructed simple furniture. Zadie's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the work became harder as her belly swelled. Owen worried constantly, trying to get her to rest more, but Zadie insisted on remaining active. She had seen too many women take to their beds for months before delivery, only to have difficult labors because their bodies had grown weak. In late August, they moved back to Owen's cabin to wait for the baby's arrival. Owen had ridden down to San Andreas to ask if there were any midwives in the area, but the doctor had told him the nearest one was over 50 miles away. Dr. Morrison gave Owen basic supplies and instructions, then wished them luck. Zadie went into labor on the 2nd of September, just as the sun was rising over the mountains. The pains started low in her back, radiating around to her belly in waves that gradually grew stronger. Owen tried to hide his fear, but Zadie could see it in the tightness around his eyes, the way his hands shook slightly when he touched her. "I need you to be calm," Zadie said between contractions. "I know you are scared, but I need you steady right now." Owen took a deep breath and nodded. "Tell me what you need." Labor lasted through the day and into the night. Owen stayed by her side the entire time, wiping her face with cool water, supporting her when she needed to walk, holding her hands when the pains grew intense enough to make her cry out. He spoke to her in a low, steady voice, telling her how strong she was, how proud he was, how much he loved her. Near midnight, the urge to push became overwhelming. Owen helped her into position, and Zadie bore down with all her strength, determined to bring this child into the world. It hurt worse than anything she had ever experienced, a tearing, burning pain that made her scream, but Owen was there, telling her she could do it. She was almost there, just a little more. And then suddenly there was relief, and the sound of a baby crying filled the cabin. Owen caught the infant, his hands gentle despite their size, and wrapped the baby in clean cloths. "A boy," he said, his voice breaking. "Zadie, we have a son." He placed the baby on her chest, and Zadie looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her child. Their son had a cap of dark hair and Owen's gray eyes, and when she touched his tiny hand, his fingers wrapped around hers with surprising strength. "He is beautiful," Zadie whispered. Exhaustion pulled at her, but she could not look away from this miracle she and Owen had created. Owen dealt with the afterbirth and cleaned Zadie up with the efficiency Dr. Morrison had taught him, then settled mother and baby in the bed and covered them with blankets. He sat beside them, one large hand gentle on his son's head, and Zadie saw tears tracking down his face. "What should we name him?" she asked. Owen was quiet for a moment. "My brothers were named Thomas and James. I would like our son to have a name that honors them, if that is all right with you." "Thomas James Lewis," Zadie said, trying it out. "Tommy for short, Tommy." Owen smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "I like that." They spent the next weeks adjusting to life with an infant. Tommy was healthy and strong, with lungs that could wake them from a sound sleep when he was hungry. Owen proved surprisingly adept at fatherhood, changing soiled cloths without complaint and walking the floor with Tommy when he was fussy. Zadie would wake sometimes in the middle of the night to find Owen sitting by the fire, the baby cradled against his bare chest, talking to him in a low voice about the mountains and the stars and all the things he would teach him when he was older. "I never knew I could love something this much," Owen said one night, looking down at Tommy's sleeping face. "It terrifies me, Zadie. What if something happens to him? What if I cannot protect him?" "We will protect him together," Zadie said, "and we will teach him to be strong and smart so he can protect himself. But we cannot live in fear, Owen. We just have to do the best we can and trust it will be enough." As fall turned to winter, they settled into new rhythms. Zadie's body recovered from the birth, and she gradually regained her strength. Owen expanded the cabin, adding another room so Tommy could have his own space as he grew. They talked about the future, about possibly having more children, about improvements they wanted to make to the property. In the spring, when Tommy was 6 months old and beginning to sit up on his own, they took him to visit the cabin Zadie and her father had started. The building stood solid and weather-tight, exactly as they had left it. Zadie carried Tommy inside and showed him the walls, telling him the story of his grandfather Malcolm, who had started this cabin, and how she had finished it with Owen's help. She traced the drill marks and chisel cuts that marked the wood, her father's confident work and her own hesitant attempts, all preserved here in this small structure. "Your grandfather would have loved you," she told Tommy, though he was too young to understand. "He would have been so proud to know his dream of settling here came true, even if he did not live to see it." Owen stood in the doorway watching them, and when Zadie looked up, the love in his eyes was so intense it made her breath catch. "What?" she asked. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." Owen crossed the room and put his arms around both of them. "I have everything I ever wanted right here." Zadie leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart. Tommy gurgled and reached for Owen's beard, his small fingers tangling in the dark hair. They stood like that for a long moment, a family surrounded by the walls they had built together. Over the next several years, their life in the mountains took on a settled quality. They worked the land, planting a large garden each spring and improving both cabins. Owen built furniture and tools, his skilled hands creating beautiful and functional pieces. Zadie learned to preserve food for the winter months, to tan hides for clothing and blankets, to do all the countless tasks required for frontier living. Tommy grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around, trying to help with whatever Owen was doing. By the time he was 3, he could identify different types of trees and knew which plants were safe to eat. Owen was patient with him, teaching him about the mountains with the same care he had shown, teaching Zadie about carpentry. In the summer of 1877, Zadie discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder and she tired more easily, but their second child, a daughter they named Lily Rose, arrived healthy in February of 1878. She had Zadie's blonde hair and a temperament that was sunny and easy from the start. With 2 children, the cabin felt smaller, so Owen began work on expanding it further, adding a second floor with 2 bedrooms for the children. It took him nearly a year, working around the demands of farming and hunting and all the other tasks required to keep them fed and sheltered. But when it was finished, they had a proper house, something that would last for generations. Tommy, now 5, helped where he could, handing his father tools and learning the basics of carpentry. Zadie watched them work together and thought about how she had traced her father's marks in the wood all those years ago, learning from what he had left behind. Now her son was learning from his father's hands, the knowledge passing from one generation to the next. They made occasional trips to San Andreas for supplies and to maintain their legal claim to the land, but increasingly their life centered on the mountains. They had neighbors now, other families who had claimed land along Grizzly Creek, and a sense of community began to develop. They helped each other with large projects, shared resources during hard times, celebrated holidays and harvests together. In 1880, Zadie gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and Marcus. The pregnancy and delivery were difficult, and Dr. Morrison, who had ridden up from San Andreas when Owen sent word Zadie had gone into labor early, told them afterward that they should probably not have any more children. 4 was a blessing, he said. Do not push their luck. Owen held the twins, one in each arm, and looked at Zadie with such love and concern that she felt tears spring to her eyes. 4 is perfect, he said firmly. We have everything we need. Zadie agreed. Their house was full of noise and life and love, more than she had ever imagined having when she had first arrived in these mountains alone and grieving. The years passed, marked by seasons and small milestones. Tommy's first deer hunt at age 8, Lily learning to read from the books Owen cherished, the twins getting into mischief with the fearless confidence of children who had never known anything but security and love. Owen's hair grew more silver at the temples, and Zadie found laugh lines forming around her eyes, but they were happy. In the summer of 1885, when Tommy was 12 and already showing signs of inheriting his father's height and build, a mining company sent representatives to their land again. The offer, this time, was substantial enough money to move to San Francisco and live comfortably for the rest of their lives. Tommy was present when the men made their pitch, and Zadie saw him looking at her, waiting to see what she would say. Gentlemen, Zadie said clearly, my father claimed this land in 1873. He died here, and his grave is on the hill overlooking the creek. My husband and I built our home here with our own hands. Our children were born here. This land is not for sale at any price, now or ever. I would appreciate it if you would leave and not come back. After the men left, Tommy came to stand beside her. Was that really your answer, Ma? You would not even consider it? Not for a moment. Zadie put her arm around her son's shoulders. He was almost as tall as she was now, growing into a young man before her eyes. Some things are worth more than money, Tommy. This place, this land, it is part of who we are. Your grandfather's marks are in that cabin down by the creek. Mine are too, and your father's. Someday your marks will be here as well, and your children's after you. I would like that, Tommy said quietly. I do not ever want to leave the mountains. That evening, after the children were asleep, Zizi and Owen walked down to the cabin her father had started. They did this sometimes, checking on the building and maintaining it, but also just to remember. Inside, Zadie traced the familiar marks in the wood, her father's confident cuts and her own hesitant early attempts, all still visible after 12 years. Do you ever regret it? Owen asked. Staying here, living this hard life instead of something easier? Zadie turned to face him. At 44, Owen was still strong and capable, though his joints ached on cold mornings and old war wounds sometimes pained him. But he was hers, her husband and partner, the father of her children, the love of her life. Never, she said. This is exactly where I am supposed to be. Owen pulled her into his arms, and they stood together in the cabin they had built, surrounded by the evidence of their labor and their love. Outside, the mountains rose against the darkening sky, eternal and unchanging. Inside, their marks remained in the wood, a record of hands and hearts that had shaped more than just timber. They had built a life here, against the odds and despite the hardships. They had raised children who knew how to work hard and love deeply. They had made a home in the wilderness, and it would stand long after they were gone, testimony to what two people could create when they refused to give up. Years continued to flow like the creek outside their door. Tommy grew into a young man, tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet competence and steady hands. At 16, he began courting a girl named Sarah from a neighboring claim, a smart young woman with red hair and a quick laugh. Owen taught Tommy how to build furniture and work wood, and Zadie would sometimes watch father and son working together, their movements synchronized, and feel her heart swell with pride. Lily, at 10, was already showing signs of being a beauty, but more importantly, she had inherited her mother's determination and her father's patience. She could outshoot her brothers with a rifle, could track deer through the forest, and had announced she had no intention of ever leaving the mountains. The twins, Samuel and Marcus, were 8 and inseparable, constantly exploring the wilderness around their home and coming back with stories of their adventures. In the spring of 1887, tragedy struck when a late freeze damaged much of their stored food supply. It was a hard year, and they had to rely heavily on hunting and what little they could salvage. But the community they had built over the years came through for them, sharing what they had until the next harvest could come in. Owen and Zadie returned the favor many times over in subsequent years, helping neighbors through their own hardships. Tommy married Sarah in 1889 in a ceremony held in the clearing between the two cabins. They spoke their vows before family and neighbors, and Zadie cried as she watched her eldest son become a husband. Owen stood beside her, his arm around her waist, and she knew he was remembering their own wedding, the promises they had made to each other in a half-finished cabin 12 years earlier. Tommy and Sarah moved into the smaller cabin, the one Malcolm had started and Zadie had finished, making it their own. Sarah was pregnant within months, and in the summer of 1890, Zadie became a grandmother to a healthy baby boy they named Malcolm, after his great-grandfather. Holding her grandson, looking down at his tiny face, Zadie felt the circle complete itself. Her father had started something here, had dreamed of building a home in these mountains. He had not lived to see that dream fulfilled, but his legacy continued. His great-grandson would grow up surrounded by the walls he had helped build, would learn to trace the marks left by hands that had shaped more than just wood. "Thank you," Zadie whispered to the memory of her father. "Thank you for bringing me here." Owen found her later, sitting on the porch of Tommy and Sarah's cabin with the baby in her arms. He settled beside her, looking out at the mountains that had been their home for so many years. "Strange to think we have been here almost 17 years, Owen said. "Seems like yesterday you were trying to lift those logs by yourself. Too stubborn to admit you needed help." Zadie laughed. "I was terrified. I had no idea what I was doing. You figured it out." Owen reached over to touch the baby's soft hair. "You always figure it out, Zadie." "We figure it out," she corrected. "I could never have done any of this without you. We were good for each other." Owen's voice was soft. "Still are." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the peaks, turning the sky brilliant shades of orange and pink. Their children's voices drifted from the main house, the twins arguing about something while Lily tried to mediate. It was the sound of family, of life continuing, of the home they had built together. The years that followed brought more changes and more growth. Lily married at 19 to a young man named James who had come west from Missouri, and they built their own cabin on the far edge of the property. The twins grew into young men, different from each other despite being identical in appearance. Samuel wanted to stay on the land, to continue the work their parents had started. Marcus dreamed of seeing more of the world, of traveling to places they had only read about in books. In 1895, Marcus left to attend school in San Francisco, promising to return but needing to follow his own path. It was hard for Owen especially, who had hoped all his children would stay close. But Zadie reminded him that they had raised their children to be independent, to make their own choices. Marcus would find his way wherever that led him. Samuel married and added another cabin to the growing family compound. More grandchildren came, filling the summers with laughter and noise. The property that had started as one woman's desperate attempt to honor her dying father's wish had become a thriving family homestead, multiple generations working the land together. In the winter of 1898, Owen fell ill with pneumonia. For weeks, Zadie sat by his bedside in terror, remembering how her mother had died of the same disease. But Owen was strong, and with careful nursing and the help of medicines Tommy rode to San Andreas to fetch, he pulled through. The illness aged him, though, leaving him weaker than before, more prone to coughs and shortness of breath. "I am not ready to leave you yet," Owen said one night as Zadie helped him back to bed after a coughing fit. "Good," Zadie said firmly, "because I am not ready to let you go." But time was relentless, and they both knew their years were growing shorter. Owen turned 60 in 1899, and Zadie 47. They were grandparents to 9 children now, with another on the way. The homestead they had built had become something beyond what either of them had imagined. On a warm day in June 1900, they walked down to the original cabin, just the two of them. It was something they did less frequently now as Owen's strength declined, but he insisted on making the trip. Inside, Zadie traced the marks in the wood as she had done countless times over the past 27 years. Her father's confident cuts, her own hesitant early work, Owen's precise additions. The wood was darker now, aged by time and weather, but the marks remained clear. I drilled every one of these timbers in the fourth wall, Zadie said, running her hands along the logs. I was so scared I would fail, that I would not be strong enough or smart enough to finish what Papa started. But you did finish it. Owen stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders. You kept your promise. We kept our promise. Zadie turned to face him. Everything good in my life came from finishing this cabin, Owen. If I had given up, if I had sold the claim and gone back to town, I never would have met you. Never would have had our children, our grandchildren. This cabin saved me. Owen pulled her close, and they stood together in the small space, surrounded by history and memory. I love you, he said simply. I have loved you since the day you sat on that crooked log with bleeding hands and refused to quit. I love you too, Zadie whispered, always. They had many more years together, watching their family continue to grow and thrive. Owen's health had its ups and downs, but he remained active well into his 60s, still able to work wood and teach his grandchildren the skills he had learned over a lifetime. Zadie's hair turned completely gray, and arthritis began to stiffen her fingers, but she remained the heart of the family, the one everyone came to with their problems and joys. Marcus returned from San Francisco in 1905, bringing with him a wife and 2 young children. He had become a teacher, and he took a position in San Andreas, visiting the homestead often and making peace with his need to live a different kind of life than his siblings. In 1910, on their 37th wedding anniversary, marked from that day they had married themselves in front of the fire, Owens and Zadie stood together in the main house, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and the first of their great-grandchildren. It was a celebration of family and endurance, of the life they had built from determination and love. Late that night, when everyone else had gone to their own homes and cabins, Zadie and Owen sat by the fire in the house they had expanded and improved so many times over the years. 37 years, Owen said, his voice rougher now with age but still strong. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. I know what you mean. Zadie took his hand, lacing their fingers together. His hands were more gnarled now, the joints swollen with arthritis, but they were still the hands she had fallen in love with, still capable of such gentle strength. I want you to know, Owen said slowly, that every single day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, the times we struggled or fought or worried, it was all worth it because we did it together. Zadie felt tears prick her eyes. Owen, let me finish. He squeezed her hand. When I came to these mountains, I thought I was done with living, really living. I thought I would just exist here until I died, alone and forgotten. And then you showed up, and you gave me a reason to be more than just a ghost hiding from the world. You gave me a family, a purpose, a life worth living. I will never be able to thank you enough for that. You do not need to thank me, Z said, her voice thick with emotion. You gave me just as much. You taught me that I did not have to be alone, that I could trust someone to stand beside me. You showed me what love really means. They sat together in silence, watching the fire burn low, comfortable in each other's presence after all these years. Outside, the mountains stood eternal under the stars, the same mountains that had witnessed their struggles and triumphs, their joys and sorrows. The years continued, as they always do. Owen's health slowly declined, though he fought stubbornly to maintain his independence. Zadie's arthritis worsened, making it harder to do the physical work she had once taken for granted. But they adapted, accepting help from their children and grandchildren, finding new ways to contribute and stay involved in the life of the homestead. In the spring of 1915, Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Zadie beside him as she had been for more than 4 decades. He was 76 years old, and he had lived to see his family grow to include 4 children, 16 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren. He was buried on the hill overlooking Grizzly Creek, next to the plot they had prepared for Zadie when her time came. Losing Owen was like losing part of herself, and for months afterward Zadie felt adrift, uncertain how to navigate a world that did not include him. But her family surrounded her with love and support, and gradually she found her way to a new normal, learning to live with the grief while still finding joy in the life that continued around her. She spent her final years in the main house, watching her grandchildren and great-grandchildren grow, telling them stories about their grandfather and their great-grandfather Malcolm about the early days when the homestead was just one unfinished cabin and a dream. She taught them to trace the marks in the wood, to understand that they were part of something bigger than themselves, a legacy built on determination and love. On a warm September afternoon in 1920, just a few weeks shy of her 68th birthday, Zadie asked Tommy to take her down to the original cabin one more time. She knew, with the certainty that sometimes comes near the end, that this would be her last visit. Tommy helped her inside, supporting her weight as arthritis and age had made walking difficult. Zadie ran her hands along the walls one final time, tracing the marks that had become as familiar to her as her own face. "Your grandfather started this," she told Tommy. "He hand-drilled every timber in these walls that he completed, and I finished it with your father's help. We traced the marks his hands left behind, and we added our own." "I know, Ma," Tommy said gently. "You have told me the story 100 times, and I will tell it 100 more if I can," Zadie said with a smile. "Because it matters, Tommy. This cabin, what it represents, that matters. Your grandfather dreamed of building a home in these mountains, and even though he died before he could complete it, his dream came true. Not the way he planned, but it came true anyway. Because of you," Tommy said. "Because I did not give up," Zadie corrected. "Because when things got hard, I kept going. Because I had help when I needed it, and I was smart enough to accept that help. That is what I want you to remember, all of you. Life will get hard, but you keep going. You accept help when you need it, and you offer help when you can, and you build something that lasts." Tommy helped her back to the main house, and that night Zadie went to sleep surrounded by pictures of her family, in the bed she had shared with Owen for so many years. She passed peacefully, slipping away to join her husband in whatever came after. They buried her beside Owen on the hill overlooking Grizzly Creek, and the entire family gathered to say goodbye. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood together, a testament to the life she and Owen had built, to the legacy that would continue long after they were gone. The cabin stood solid and strong, the marks of their builders' hands still visible in the wood. Malcolm Crawford's confident cuts, Zadie's hesitant early work that grew surer as the wall rose, Owen's precise additions. Future generations would trace those marks and remember, would understand that they were part of something built with love and determination and hands that refused to quit. The homestead continued to thrive, growing and changing as each new generation added their own marks to the landscape. But the original cabin remained, carefully preserved as a reminder of where it all started, of a woman who kept a promise to her dying father and found love and family in the process. And on quiet mornings when the mist rose from Grizzly Creek and the mountains stood purple against the dawn sky, you could almost see them, Malcolm Crawford with his drill and his dreams, Zadie with her bleeding hands and stubborn determination, Owen with his quiet strength and patient teaching, building something that would last, leaving marks that time could not erase, creating a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. The story of the homestead became part of family lore, passed down through the years. Children learned to trace the marks in the wood and understand what they represented, not just physical labor, but love and determination, partnership and family, the refusal to give up even when the odds seemed impossible. Tommy lived to be an old man himself, eventually passing the leadership of the family to his own children. The homestead grew to include not just the original cabins, but additional buildings, barns, workshops, all of them built with care and precision, all of them bearing the marks of the hands that shaped them. The land that Malcolm Crawford had claimed in 1873, that Zadie had fought to keep and Owen had helped her build into a home, remained in the family for generations. Mining companies came and went, offering ever larger sums of money, but the answer was always the same. Some things were worth more than money. Some legacies could not be bought or sold, and in that first cabin, the one that started it all, the marks remained clear in the wood. Evidence of hands that had worked and dreamed and built, of love that had endured through hardship and joy, of a promise kept and a life well lived. The cabin stood as a monument to what two people could create when they refused to give up, when they chose to build rather than run, when they opened their hearts to love despite all the reasons not to. It was a love story written in wood and time, preserved in the drill marks and chisel cuts that told of struggle and triumph, of grief transformed into hope, of a mountain man and a determined woman who found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone.